Just trying to get the camera to move to me.
There we go.
There we go.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Today is Thursday, November 4th. This is our second subcommittee 2 meeting for task 4B for identification and evaluation of potential FMP. Hope everyone's doing well. That's just a very quick good morning to everybody. The approval of the minutes. If there's any questions or any revisions that need to be made that you guys saw to those minutes, that's the second item. If not, someone can make a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Do we want to vote to
Yeah.
approve the minutes for everybody? Say aye.
Aye.
Approval.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. And with that, the minutes are approved. The next item, the agenda item 3, ACOM, introduction of subcommittee members and the interest in any specific FMPs. I'm not sure who's going to take the lead, Gilbert or Chris or Brian.
This is Jeff. I think I'm leading, right, today, Chris?
Yeah, I was just going to do the introductions and then hand it off to Jeff. I guess we already went through the introductions and who all's here today. If you want to go to the next slide, Jeff, real quick, I just wanted to see if there's anyone else joining us that hasn't spoken up yet. Now is a good time. All right.
Hi, this is Joanna with Hudspeth County. I just hopped on.
Joanna, is that,
Yes,
did you
sir.
say Joanna McKinney? Okay. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, Jeff, do you want to go back real quick to the previous slide? So we'll just go over the objective of the subcommittee one more time, very briefly, just so in case there's anyone who, if this is their first meeting in the subcommittee, we'll also discuss negative impact guidelines from the TWDB guidance. We'll also talk about the required data for TWDB projects, and we'll go over the guidelines for selecting potentially feasible FMPs. We'll also discuss the regionally defined FMPs in the context of the guidelines for the City of El Paso Stormwater Master Plan and the El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan. Then we'll have potential committee actions where we'll consider voting on the process for selecting FMPs from those stormwater master plans. And lastly, we'll go over the tentative future meeting dates for the subcommittee. All right, Jeff, you can jump forward 2 slides. So just for everyone's knowledge, again, this subcommittee is focused on identifying and evaluating potential FMPs. They can be in any part of our region, Region 14. We will have some meetings that focus just on the Rio Grande main stem, and we'll give you all a heads up on which meetings those will be so that we make sure the IBWC is in attendance for those meetings. And you'll be able to identify those from the agenda and from the meeting materials. The agenda gets posted a week in advance, the meeting materials 3 days in advance. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff Irvin from AECOM. He was intimately involved in the development of the stormwater master plans for City of El Paso and El Paso County. So he's very familiar with those, and he's going to talk about the process and how we select projects from those documents. Go ahead, Jeff.
All right, so I'm going to I'm going to be using this flow chart to explain what we're going to be trying to accomplish in today's meeting. This gives the context for the things that we're going to be stepping through. So basically, the first thing in terms of the projects we come up with is we're going to come up with like a master list from sources throughout the entire region. And they include what comes out of the stakeholder survey. We're querying TxDOT. We're querying the Corps of Engineers. We're querying the irrigation district. We're querying the IBWC. And we're also other entities such as Hudspeth County that's on this call will also be providing lists of their potential projects. And then those projects have to go through a sort of a fail check.
We have it on Excel.
If the project has a negative impact, then per the definition that TWDB has, then the project's not feasible. So any project that anybody that fails that test, we're just not going to consider again. If it passes that test, then it's going to go through a review by the Regional Flood Planning Group. So the planning group can't pass through all the projects into the regional plan because just in terms of the general practicality of the list, the city master plan, somebody's got their speakerphone.
Yeah, if everybody could please mute. Thank you.
So the city master plan has 96 projects. The county master plan has 69 projects. We obviously can't go through and evaluate as part of this plan over 150 projects. So the Regional Flood Planning Group has to find a way to take this large list of projects from around the region and winnow it down to projects that are going to be evaluated as part of this plan. And this is what we have to get done by November 15th. We don't have to choose the projects by November 15th, but we have to define for the Water Development Board how we're going to winnow down the large group of projects into projects that we're actually going to study as part of the plan. This is not a winnowing down to select the projects for submission, which is the last step. This is just winnowing down to see which ones we're going to study, and I'll explain what it is we have to study. So this reduced list goes into a test where is the project fully defined per what the Water Development Board has. If it is, then it can go into the list that the Flood Planning Group considers to prioritize. It then is eligible to go into this list where you at the end say these projects are the ones that we think should be considered for funding by the state. If it's not fully defined, and given the way that the Water Development Board's fully defined, almost all of our projects are going to be no. If the project is not fully defined, then we have to go through a process to fully define it, and then it goes into the list of projects for the planning group to prioritize. So this is where we get our limit on the number of projects that we can evaluate. We can't look at all 96 of the city plans. We can't look at all 69 of the county plans. What we're going to do today, because those are the two largest lists that are likely to be in our region, we're going to talk through how to determine what's the process that we're going to use to winnow down the projects in the city master plan. And I'm going to discuss that. And then we're going to have Clint Kimball, who led the county master plan, discuss the projects in the county master plan and try to come up with a process for winnowing those down. And then it's going to come back to me, and I'm going to talk about everybody else. So everybody else includes, on this call, it includes the IBWC, it includes the irrigation district, It also includes Hudspeth County, but it also includes anybody else from throughout the region. How are we going to winnow those projects down to get to where, out of their list, out of the stakeholder survey, et cetera, which are the ones that we're going to be doing this work to define them fully per the TWDB. So first, let's talk about this first test, negative impact guidelines. There's a lot of nuance to this, but basically what the TWDB says, no negative impact means that a project will not increase risk of flooding on flood risk of surrounding properties. So if you've conceived a project that takes water off of one property and increases flooding on another project, that's just by definition not going to be considered. The state is not going to buy that. So the project has to be one that solves your problem or mitigates your problem, but doesn't make anybody else worse, right? I think almost all the projects that we have in the city and county plan fit that particular test. So now we're in the point of what's the project fully defined here. And this is how, in brief, the information that the TWDB says you require for the FMPs. I'm not going to go through this whole list, but I wanted to highlight 4 things that are the main thing you have to keep in mind. One is that a project's going to address a particular area of flooding, right? The Water Development Board, yep. The Water Development Board wants to know how many structures are in the 100-year floodplain before the project. I've got that in yellow. That's not that tough for us as the consultants, because the Water Development Board has given us these flood risk maps already for the region, and we already have maps for El Paso County, for instance, right? Outside of El Paso County, we'll use the best available information, which is what the Water Development Board's already given us. So this one's fairly straightforward. These next ones are the ones that require effort on our part. You have to, this is what they want, is they want the number of structures after you put in the project. How many structures get their 100-year flood risk reduced? In other words, if you have a structure you can put in your project, you're going to reduce the floodplain some. Some houses are still going to be left in the floodplain, but they'll have reduced risk. You have to count those up. And the ones that you remove from the floodplain, you have to count those up. The problem is that requires you to basically take the characteristics of that project, put them into a hydraulic model, and get these calculations, right? That requires time. In addition, beyond that total, you also have to get the benefit cost ratio, and that complicates things even more. There's a app which the TWDB has developed, which includes things like you need to know what the values of the properties are and depth of flooding and so on. So that requires some effort for every one of these projects. That's why we can't do them all, right? So let's just review real quickly what the TWDB requires for consideration as potentially feasible projects. Once again, and this is their flowchart that's in their guidance. And I'm not going to lead you through this, which would take us a half an hour alone, right? The basics out of this flowchart are, if a project has a net negative effect, you can't recommend the project. If the project has full required details, you can consider the project. And this is important. If the project does not have all the project details, in other words, if you want to submit it without a benefit cost ratio, if you want to submit it without the H&H analysis, you can do that. You can consider recommending the project and leave the project details blank, but they're going to score 0 in the total, where they total up the points that let you rank the projects statewide. So there's a strong incentive for you to get all the information on the projects that you want, to get that information, the structure count and the benefit cost ratio. You can also, if you just think that although we want this project, we really don't know, we don't have enough information to evaluate it. Like we may not, as a consultant, have enough information to be able to calculate the benefits without additional H&H analyses. Then you could recommend an FME, a study, to basically keep it in the plan as a study and then address it in the next plan, right? So those options are all there, right? Okay. So now what we're going to do, let's go back up to the front again. We're headed towards what is the process we're going to apply to cut back the number of projects in the city master plan so that we get a reduced number that we evaluate for the regional plan.
Hey, Jeff, it's Dave Hall. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
When it says full required details, the project has full required details, does that mean there has to be an entry in all 20 of these areas for it to be acceptable? Or if you leave several of them blank, you just, like you said, you just get a 0, it's still considered a full required detail?
Okay, what they're saying is that the RFPG may consider the recommending the project. Like, so you're going to end at the end of this plan, you're going to have a list of recommended projects. You can still recommend the project as a plan that's potentially going to be subsidized by the state. You can recommend it as one, but in the master scoring where they're going to compare that project with the project from the Neches River Basin, it's going to be at a disadvantage because it's not going to get points for whichever one of these categories you don't put the information on. They aren't precluding you from submitting the project. They're handicapping you if you don't give them the information they want to be able to compare it to the other one statewide.
So what you're saying is if we can't pick projects that allow all 20 of these areas to be fully completed, we potentially lose out prioritization.
Right, and what you can do again is if you can't do those because you don't have enough information at this time, you have the option to choose an FME, a study, and say, you know, we need to study this, and then we'll be able to get that information in the next plan, and then it goes in with a higher score in the next plan. You could include it in this plan as a recommended project, and then have it tagged with an FME. But what that does is it does keep us from having to do this work. Those kind of projects aren't part of our workload. They just go in because the regional flood planning group wants it, but we don't study it because we don't have the information for it, right? So we don't do any of the scoring that you all want to compare the projects. It just goes into this. We recommend it, but we don't have the information we need to score it, so we're going to provide an FME. That's an option, right?
Hey Jeff, this is Gilbert. Is there going to be a different group of fundings set aside for studies, or is I'm assuming it's all competitive, but I'm assuming, is it going to be like a statewide portion of the funding that's going to go for studies, I guess? In other words, if we propose one of these projects as a study, would it be competing statewide against other projects that are also asking for a study?
You know, I think that's a question for the TWDB, and they're not on the call. But I think they have just provided us with added budget for FMEs. Chris, you know that issue. What's
right? Yeah, I think it was about when Brian or Gilbert can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was about an additional $100K for our region for this scope of work that would be due in August timeframe. I'm not sure if that's Gilbert trying to talk, but it's not coming through very clearly. And then there's also an additional, I think, 500K or 550K for implementing some of these FMEs that we come up with, and those would be due at a later date. So, Brian, am I getting that right? You agree with that?
Sorry, I was messaging Gilbert about the microphone. So there's going to be two parts to this. The 100,000, as Chris mentioned, is for the existing scope, and then there's about 500,000, 550, I think, potentially for FMEs, additional to perform the FMEs that are identified through this first cycle.
So Gilbert, I think the answer is I think what they're doing now is they're divvying up funds for that to each region based upon what their perception is of the regions. However they divvied up the money originally between the regions, they're doing the same process with the initial set of studies they want done, and then they will be funding new planning cycles just like they did for the state water plan. And when they do that, I presume they'll set the budgets for the future cycles based upon the needs that were defined in the first cycle. I don't know how that, but it won't be a competitive, I don't think it's going to be a competitive list in the same with scoring as they have for the FMPs. There's not going to be any scoring of the FMEs, as I'm aware.
So you're I guess what my understanding is you're saying that there's going to be funding set aside for what the group defines as of the projects that need a study.
Yes.
There's going to be fundings. As a group, we would decide which projects would move forward with a study. We would set us, and then that project potentially can compete statewide for
yes,
funding on the future cycles, correct?
Yes, right, yeah.
Okay, I understand, thank you.
All right, so let me put us
Yep.
back briefly on the on where we're going. I'm trying to get this done in an hour and a half. Let me move forward and get through the city and the county, and then we'll open it up for general discussion. If somebody has a quick question.
Yeah, Jeff, can I just clarify real quick? Looking at the technical guidelines, there are 4 data attributes that need to be populated for every project. One of those is the benefit cost ratio. So that is a required value for each project, but there are certain things that I think are optional, like the multiple benefits, operational maintenance needs, administrative regulatory obstacles and difficulties. So there's a lot of different factors that Jeff showed in a previous slide that go into that consideration, but I think the BCR is a required component for every project.
Thanks for that correction. All right, let's talk about how we're going to be reducing the number of projects from the City of El Paso Stormwater Master Plan for inclusion in this particular plan. I'm going to have a very brief tour of the Stormwater Master Plan for everybody, just so you know what's in it. So the Stormwater Master Plan for the City of El Paso, which was first published, I think, in 2010, then it was published again in 2018 and is currently in a draft fashion, and now it's being updated again and should be published shortly. But it has 96 projects, about $490 million worth of plan. It's divided up into a whole series of regions. They're all, the city is broken up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 regions, and there's projects defined for each region. You're going to get a whirlwind tour here of what's associated with each of those regions. So let's talk about the east side. Here's the Franklins on the east side here. There's a series of projects that are up against the Franklins that are primarily improvements to the to the detention along the carrying, blocking sediment coming off the Franklins. And then along the flow path that carries everything down to Pershing Dam, which you all may be familiar with, there's a whole series of projects to basically improve the plumbing that goes through the Fort Bliss sump and onto the Pershing Dam. And that includes some additional detention in the vicinity of Tobin Drain. It includes improvements to the channels that lead on to Pershing Dam. On the Mid-Valley side, which again is right in the central portion right here, there's a series of projects, a lot of which are dealing with localized drainage and some relatively small detention. And then there's some improvements at the river to carry flows into the river. In Mission Valley, let's talk at West Central, which is over here on this side of El Paso. And then we're going to talk about Central right adjacent to it. On the West Central side, there's a series of detention basins that are all up against the Franklins on the western slope. And there's improvements to carry flows into the Rio Grande at the base of that watershed. And there's some improvements to basically improve drainage under TxDOT structures. The projects on these figures that are shaded orange are projects which the city is trying to get joint funding with another agency. In this case, TxDOT. In other cases, it's largely with the irrigation district. In the central area of El Paso, there's a series of improvements to the existing dams that are up against the Franklins, carrying water out of the, catching water and debris coming out of the Franklins. And then there's improvements to collect the water that accumulates above I-10, and then pump stations to get them into the river, pump stations and conduits to carry the water into the river. And these are all, as you can imagine, fairly large projects. But these are the projects also that are needed to keep the water off the interstate, which is obviously important. In Mission Valley, which again is down in this part of the city, there's a series of projects to improve the Mesa Drain and to improve getting water into the Rio Grande, and those are projects which the city's trying to get joint funding with the irrigation district. And then there's some additional projects to help carry water at the end of the system in the city, convey it to the Rio Grande. On the east side, most of the projects are internal, are localized drainage projects dealing with improvements to street drainage. Lastly, on the northeast side, again, looking back up at the northeast. On the northeast side, we're northwest side, sorry. On the northwest side, the projects are largely up against the Franklins. Again, there's a series of detention basins to catch water off the water and debris and sediment coming off the Franklins. And then down in the Rio Grande Terrace, there's a series of projects to improve the drainage into the Rio Grande, which is lots of flooding along Donovan Drive and flooding along the Mesa Drain. And these projects improve the conveyance into the Rio Grande. So every one of these projects has in the master plan has a figure that details the different components of the project. So it's not in a lot of cases, it's not a single project, it's a project with a bunch of multiple components associated with it. So all these projects were were identified through a process where a problem was identified, and then a need was identified for that project, and then a solution to address that need was developed. And in this case, in the Stormwater Master Plan, they were all the structural solutions because they cost money to construct. All right. So the way the city, and this is what I need you all to pay attention to as the regional flood planning group, because you have to buy into this process or not. And you either are going to, at the end of this, we're going to have you vote on whether you want to basically create your own process for evaluating the projects, or whether you're going to accept the process that the city went through in order to evaluate these projects. And we're going to do this again for the county. So I'm explaining now how they evaluated those projects. And I'm going to, at the end of this, going to say, do you accept this method, or can you conceive of some improvements of this method that you all want to propose? And again, today we're dealing with the process. We're not actually doing any voting. We're not even saying what the process, what the actual benefits are. We're not actually saying what the point totals are. We're just basically defining the process today. So the way the city of El Paso defined their process is they defined in coordination with a stakeholder group, they defined what they thought the important project benefits were, and then they made up a list of permits, which typically added complexity to getting the project executed. So this is what are the benefits, and the complexity was, can we realistically get this done because of the hurdles we have to go through in order to get it built, right? So that's the way this worked. And then each one of these project benefits was assigned a point total, and each one of these permit issues was assigned an adjustment to that point total. So, for instance, the project benefits, let me just run through these because we're going to talk about whether you think these are adequate or whether you want to propose more. But if it dealt with dam safety because of the issues associated with a dam breach flood, the city decided to award that particular category of benefits 4 points. If it reduced flooding on real property, it got basically 1 to 4 points. If it reduced flooding of IH10, it got a lump sum 4 points. So those projects would rank high. If it removed a whole lot of property from the flood zone, 100 plus. And this was largely in the judgment of the consultant, whether this project would have a major effect affecting that many properties. There wasn't a formal flood extent mapping done at the time. If the project, then it got 3 points, it added points. If it reduced the risk associated with debris flow, because of all the problems associated with debris flow, which include a lot of maintenance, it includes when you block a culvert under a road, the water goes through the neighborhoods on paths it hadn't had before. So debris flow has its own extra headaches. It got 3 points. If it reduced flooding on major arterial roadways, it got 4 points. That's in addition to IH10. So a project that helped out IH10 got both points. It got 8 points. If it reduced maintenance, and there was somebody from the city maintenance department in there to provide the scoring for this particular benefit, it got 4 points. if it reduced nuisance flooding, in other words, it was primarily involved with taking water off of roads during routine flood events, then it got 2 points. And I'm not going to go through all these permits, but if a permit was required, there was the total that came out of this calculation was reduced by 1. If it was easy, then it got a +1, which of course negated the -1. If it was difficult, it got a -2. If it was unknown but potentially significant, it got a -2. So after a project was totaled up and got the total points, and let's just run back to this table real quickly. I'm not sure if you can see this, but let's look briefly at the Dallas pump station. It had 4 points for reducing flooding of real property. It had 4 points for taking water off of IH10. It removed over 100 properties from the flood zone. It reduced flooding for other arterial roadways. It also reduced nuisance flooding, routine flooding. It totaled up to 17. It didn't look like it was going to be difficult to permit, so its total points ended up 16. So after all the points were totaled up, the projects were sorted by their total points in inverse order, and then they were ranked from top to bottom, and if a bunch of them had the same point score, then they got ranked according to cost. So anything with 15 points, if it cost less, the least cost one was the one that popped up to the top. So now let's open this up to questioning. We're gonna have a series of polls here. And now's where we're opening up for question, and there's no need to rush this decision. We can talk for as long as you all want, right? But the first question is, can we make a decision on which of these projects to carry forward for ranking with the qualitative factors used by the city in the Stormwater Master Plan? Again, this is not choosing them for the plan. This is just choosing whether we're going to evaluate them.
Jeff, I think Omar has a question.
I'm sorry, somebody else has to pay attention to the hands, something or warn me.
That was
Yeah,
his
Omar.
Omar.
Do I need to do something here? Omar, go ahead. You have something to say?
So just before we get into the questions that you have, I do have some more general questions so that I can wrap my mind around the process that was done at both city and county. Did ACOM lead both city and county planning efforts?
Yes.
Okay. Is the process used by the county and the city very different?
They're substantially different, but again, we did not come up with the schemes.
Mm-hmm.
We basically provided technical guidance to the city and the county, and but we did not. We basically said, what's important to you? How important is it to you? How do you want to? Do you want to do this qualitatively? Do you want to do it quantitatively? So they developed their own processes. So the reason we're doing this twice today is because there are different processes between the city and the county, right?
Got it. And then is there any mismatch between the processes used by the city and the county compared to what the TWDB requires of us?
No, the TWDB does not, no, there's no, the TWDB provides guidance on how to score the projects, right? When they come through, but that's a different process than, and that's why we have to do study after they've been winnowed down to a shorter list, right? Is we have to produce the information that the TWDB wants used in the ranking. And Brian, you understand the later phases better than I do, so correct me if I have this wrong. But basically, this initial check for determining which projects get carried forward into the study is all they want from us is a process.
Got it.
And that's what we're coming up with today. Can we accept the city's process as it is, or do you want to modify the city's process? And we're not applying this process to, for instance, Hudspeth County. That's not the decision we're making at this point. We're just applying it to this list that the city has, and then we'll decide as a group how many of these 96 projects of the city should be carried forward in the plan.
Got it. Thank you. That's it.
Hey, Levi has a question.
I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. Say we have 100 projects we're evaluating with this point system. We narrow it down to 25. Those 25 projects then have to be evaluated again to see how they fare up with the Texas Water Development Board's point system, correct?
Right. As Brian said, every one of those has to have a benefit cost done, right? So, we'll have to figure it out. I mean, it's obviously we're in on this decision as a consultant because we can't do them all, right? But you'll see that it's sort of an easier process with the county projects because they've already got a BCA. They already have a benefit cost than it is with the city projects where we don't have a benefit cost, right? So there's, it's just, we're going to have to figure this out as we go through it. But we will provide, I see this working that you all figure out how many you want to carry forward into this process, and we try to find a way to do it as a consultant. We want to basically serve the regional flood planning group with and address as many projects as you all think are important. And some of them may have to drop off. The ones that are on the bottom may have to drop off where we make it an FME for the next time, right? But we're gonna start out trying to get them all that you all want, and we're sort of at your mercy to be tough at this point. I don't want to set a numerical limit because it really depends upon which ones you all want. Some of them are going to be simple, some of them are going to be tough. The ones in the city are not going to be as tough as you would think because we do have models for the city, obviously. And so it's a relatively, and we're used to putting in projects into those models in order to evaluate changes. So it's not that difficult.
Okay, I think now we got a Nets group and then followed by Gisela with another question. Go ahead, Dave, or whoever had it.
Dave, if we choose, as you're asking here, to make a decision on the factors for both the city and the county, taking into account that you said those factors were different, does that cause a major problem for the contractor? Or based on your comment that you made just a minute ago, is that something that you guys can resolve?
No, let me go back. The critical thing here to understand is that all we're going to do at this point, all we're deciding on here is the process to winnow down the projects to the ones that we are going to consider. As soon as we come up with this subset of projects for the city and the subset of the projects for the county, they are going to have the same, they're going to be brought even. The city projects and the county projects are going to be brought up even in terms of the evaluation that's done by the flood planning group in later phases, right? So you're gonna in context together, you're gonna tell us which ones to look at from the city and which ones to look at from the county. There may be some different levels of effort associated with them, but at the end of that, our study, they're going to look the same in terms of the amount of information that's available for them, right? And it's the same thing for whatever one we get from Hudspeth County. I mean, if Hudspeth County projects get included in this list, then after the city and the county go through the process required by the Water Development Board, they're going to come up apples to apples when they get evaluated against each other. But at this point, we're just dealing with the process to get our list down that we have to look at.
Okay, so what you're telling me is the difference between, in qualitative factors between the city and the county is not an issue.
It's not an issue, no.
Okay, thanks. That answers my question.
Yeah, I mean, it's only an issue. No, it doesn't matter, because that's how the county wanted. The county had different concerns than the city. The city was concerned about IH10. The county wasn't concerned about IH10. They don't have flooding on IH10. So that's just a single example on how they were different. They had a lot of the same concerns, but some of them were different, and their way of evaluating them was different. And Clint's going to cover that.
I guess Gisela, you got your question?
Qualitative factors for the city?
Gisela, you have something to say? Yep.
I think Dave had a follow-up question.
Oh, I just wonder, is it appropriate for us to make a motion to accept the qualitative factors in answer to your question number one and answer yes?
I think, are you asking me or are you asking Gisela?
Well, I'm basically asking you guys as the contractor, but
okay, all right.
You know, if you're interested in us making a motion,
yes,
to accept yes or to yes with edits or no, then do you need a motion to do that, or how do we tell you the answer?
All right, that's a very good question. What we're going to do here, we're going to do with the county too, is we're going to run through 3 questions, and those 3 questions are going to define the process. And this is not a formal vote. This is just a poll. So, Brian, you want to proceed with the poll question on question 1?
Okay.
Do we want to hear Gisela's question?
So my question is regarding the BC. Are we using, is Texas Water Development Board's toolkit similar to what we use this,
Is anybody else getting an echo, or is that just me?
I couldn't hear that.
You're getting an echo, Gisela.
Okay. So my question is, if the BC toolkit that Texas Water Development Board uses, is it similar to FEMA's or is it different?
It's similar.
Okay, and is that the same one that you used for the counties?
Yes.
The cost? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
So can I proceed with just polling on this first question? All right, Brian.
Okay, I'm going to just launch. We're going to do it similarly to how we did it in our subcommittee 1 meeting, with polls that will launch to the chat window. And as Jeff mentioned, this is not a formal vote. This is just to facilitate discussion and get a sense for where everyone is, how everyone is feeling on this particular question. So the question here is, should the subcommittee use the qualitative factors from the city stormwater master plan? And the choices are yes, yes with edits, which we can discuss, or no, the whole process needs to be rethought.
This is Delbert. Sorry, I got a couple questions. One, I assume I can answer the poll as a non-voting member. I hope the group doesn't have an issue with that, since it's not a formal vote. And then 2, this is specifically to winnow down city projects.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Thank
you. And obviously, AECOM, nobody votes.
I can't submit my vote. It says that submission failed. Does anybody else have that same problem?
I'm also not able to
Same
vote.
here.
Brian, it may be because you're not running the slideshow.
Well, we are getting some responses. So right now they're sort of half and half in terms of yes and yes with edits. So for those who were not able to submit responses. How can, do you
Can we
want
just
to?
type them in the chat so it stays with record?
Sure, that sounds good.
So those of you that wanted edits, you mind piping up and saying what type of edits you'd like to see?
I put yes with edits, but primarily because I'm still not completely familiar with how they did that. I mean, the text is small. I'm not sure I got it all. So that's why I put edits. But I'm fine if that's what the contractors think it's appropriate, that the rest of the group thinks it's appropriate. I don't live in El Paso, so I'm fine.
So if I may, the reason we did that, because the original master plan just had the advantages, I believe, but then when we were, I guess in the first 10 years, we learned that some of those projects were more difficult to build because we had to buy property because of permitting issues, so et cetera, right? That's why we decided to put the permitting factors there. If it was a complicated project, then it would take a lot of permitting, and it would and that would take a long time to design. Then there were factors that that would weigh against it. So they ranked a little bit lower than originally assumed. And the reason was because we wanted to pretty much get to the low-hanging fruit. We wanted to tackle those projects, and they were the easiest to build, the easiest to move forward with, and we wanted results and be able to protect the most people possible. So that's the reason we did that, and it worked. It worked well. We also had a group of stakeholders involved with different neighborhood associations, open space, businesses. We had schools, commercial, et cetera, and it worked out really well. So just a little bit of background.
So did anybody else have any recommendations on edits?
I did. First, I wanted to see if at all possible, we can start thinking about BCA. In these projects, it's not included in the El Paso section. And then I wanted to give the opportunity for Gisela to tell us if there's anything else they wanted to add to this. And if not, then stick with it.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood. I broke up a little bit on that. Were there things that you wanted to edit on this?
It was mostly an opportunity to ask Gisela if there's anything else she wanted to add to this.
I think the only thing that I consider, but I don't know how we would be able to score that. It's if the construction would be very it would be a heavy burden on the area residents, because that's something that we've learned that maybe when we're doing a project, then residents may come back and say, you know what, it's just we've gone through so much trouble with this project that we would have rather continue to flood. They said that before, so I don't know if that's something that we can.
Okay, I think we have in the permit complexity, we have the street utility and amenities reconstruction. I think we could go back through and look at the ones that you want to look at and add values to add more negative to the ones that are involved with street utility construction that disrupts the neighborhoods. I think we could handle it with that factor without having to add another factor.
Okay. That would be the only one.
All right. So let's go ahead and so I think, can we then proceed with a yes answer on this one? Let's go on. Okay, the next one is, and maybe this is not needed given what's the input we've gotten, but can we make the decision with the existing, since we've accepted the existing quantitative factors, can we make decisions with the existing point values for existing factors and assign point values to any new factors. We don't have any new factors, so can we live with the existing point values? What I'm hearing is that we might want to make a pass through the projects to basically add more negative where it disrupts the neighborhoods. Is that what you're saying, Gisela?
Yes.
Are there any other adjustments to the point values that anybody in reviewing the point values that are assigned to these projects? So far, all we're doing is making that one pass through to judge whether we need to change the permit complexity value.
So by voting yes here, we're saying that you're going to make that change?
What we're saying is that at the next meeting, we're going to, when we get to, this is just the process, right? So when we get to the meeting where we actually do this winnowing of the projects, we will start off with a pass through the projects to change that factor in light of what Gisela suggested on community impacts. We'll basically deal with it with that factor.
So to acknowledge Gisela's concern, we should vote no.
No, I think what we do is we say, and Brian's writing this out into the vote at the end of the meeting. What we're going to say is we will make the decision with the existing point values for existing factors with one exception. And that exception is that we will review the impact on construction impact on communities and add difficulty to the utility construction permit factor. And that'll be, and then we'll go ahead and sort everything again.
All right, so you'd vote no if there are any additional point adjustments besides that one we already mentioned. Otherwise, if that's the only adjustment, you can go ahead and vote yes.
I'm not sure we need to vote. I think we've discussed this enough. I think we have consensus, right? So let's just move on to the third question unless somebody. So the third question is, so again, I have to define this. I have to define this in the process for the TWDB on November 15th. We have to put to the full committee some process that we recommend for this. So what process do we recommend for selecting the number of city projects as potentially feasible? So remember, we're going to have a list like this that's sorted, and I know you can't see this very well. Let me see if I can increase my.
Can you close the poll for now, Brian, so they can see that list?
Sorry, I pushed the poll too soon. I can try to close that, yeah.
And I think if it shows up in the chat bar, we don't need it on the screen.
I closed the poll. We'll reopen it when it's ready.
So basically, we end up with a total number of points. The question is, how do we select the projects that we're going to carry into the plan? And the process that the options are either use the scoring totals and select the cutoff point total in consensus, or we go ahead and add other city projects after discussion with the subcommittee. Do we want to give a final chance for the city and anybody else to add something to this list? And then the other one, which I think you've already dismissed, is to, well, you haven't dismissed it yet, would be to go through the list one by one, sorted by score, and discuss. In other words, rather than do it with a sorting mechanism, have a discussion where we talk about each individual project. Can we vote on this?
Given what Gisela told us about lessons learned on issues like property ownership, willing landowners, all that kind of stuff. Are those issues considered in the scoring already, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So going through each one and discussing each one individually probably won't give us any new information.
I don't think so, no. So that
eliminates the third choice.
So the way we have it now, we would make this pass through and change the permit complexity once. Then we'd sort it, and then we'd look at how the points are arrayed, and we decide in consensus, you all leading the discussion, how many of those projects we're going to carry forward into this plan. That would be.
I would be inclined to go with the section option, just because we might learn something.
Right. And I think this gives you an out.
Yeah.
For instance, we're going to have a discussion at another subcommittee meeting where we go through the lessons from the historic floods, which includes the floods we had in August, which were something that hadn't been seen before. And Gisela might think of some other projects that weren't in the list that address things like in that project. So I think the second one might be a good choice.
I agree.
I agree too.
Can you do a quick poll, Brian? That would be the second one.
And if for those of you who are finding errors, if you vote on it in the chat bar instead of on that screen in the middle, it seems to work better. There are two places you could submit your vote.
Brian?
What's that?
Do you have a result?
Yeah, in the chat, it seems like most all of the responses so far have been in agreement with that.
All right. So now, all right. So we have 25 minutes left. I think we've been through this once, but we're going to go through it again with the county. Just want to see the tolerance. We're likely to go over 10 or 15 minutes. Can we tolerate that?
Yes.
All right. So Chris, Clint, you want to go ahead and go through the county master plan?
Sure. I'll try to be quick here. Do you want me to share my own screen?
Or I can do it for you if you want.
Yeah, you can go ahead and do it for me. Keeps it simple. So the original county stormwater master plan was developed in 2010, and I led the effort on the consultant side to update it in 2020. And the 2020 update was very similar to the original plan. We just added some extra analysis and some extra areas. But as you can see on this map, the plan included 69 different projects, which are, the type of project is indicated by different icons here. It included dams, which are the green triangles, basins, which are the blue rectangles, some channel improvements, largely to improve conveyance or maintenance at various arroyos or channels, and a number of crossings. And if you look carefully, a lot of those crossings are in a line. They're associated with the Mesa Drain. Those were developed in consultation with the irrigation district to improve just water supply and maintenance of the drain. So even though a lot of those are considered individual projects, they generally serve the same purpose. Some other of these projects, which are in the vicinity of Socorro, just uphill of it, were actually the concepts for those were developed by the Corps of Engineers in a study that was completed around 2013. So the county stormwater master plan included, these ideas that came from different sources. Our update in 2020 was done in 2 phases. You don't need to worry about that because both those phases are complete. just so you know, this is what they look like. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. But one of the updates that was done in 2020 was this benefit cost analysis to develop benefit cost ratios for each of these projects, which we know is an important step, which needs to be done at some point. And in this table, each row here represents a different project. For each one, we have the cost estimate in total cost, but next to that, there's also the annualized cost. So keeping in mind here, when you develop a benefit cost ratio, everything has to be done in annual terms. So that's using the current discount rate. And then we looked at two different types of benefits: structure benefits and agriculture benefits. So the total number of potential benefits for any given project there are more than just those two, but those two were the easiest to assess for all the projects in the county stormwater master plan. But we looked at just those two to give us a representative idea of which projects would have a high benefit cost ratio and which ones would have a low ratio. And as you can see that ratio on the far right, the BCR, benefit cost ratio, these are sorted in descending order. So when the master plan was finished in 2020, the county took 5 of those 6 highest BCR projects and looked at more benefits for those: roadway benefits, critical infrastructure benefits, mental health and anxiety benefits, all these things that can be legitimately counted. And that actually resulted in an increase of the BCR. Each of those actually rose over 1. Some of them barely over 1, from 0.6 to about 1, just to give you an idea of how much some of those other uncounted benefits can increase the number. But those increases are not reflected in this table because that would give those projects an unfair advantage over the ones that didn't get the extra analysis. It was very tempting to use that benefit cost ratio as a full replacement of the prioritization for the county, because benefit cost ratio is a very important factor or indicator of the likelihood of a project to get grant funding. But it was decided that a benefit cost ratio, because it is so heavily influenced by property and infrastructure values, it would give an unfair advantage to more affluent neighborhoods. So instead of using benefit cost ratio wholesale, county developed a 2-tier or a 2-stage process. Stage 1 and then benefit cost ratio would be its own second stage that was done afterwards. So stage 1 included a lot of the same non-quantitative factors that were included in the original stormwater master plan, plus and the color red are new factors that weren't included in 2010. So they included the number of permits required in stage 1, sort of inspired by the city stormwater master plan, which has been doing the same thing. So each project was given a certain number based on these stage 1 criteria, grouped into certain tiers, and then within each tier, the projects would be sorted by benefit cost ratio. Next slide. So looking at stage 1, these are all those different stage 1 non-quantitative or less quantitative factors, and the number of points they were given. So look at number of residential units. That's an important number for us here, right? If a project didn't benefit any residential units, it didn't get any points, but it could get up to 9 points for a few of them that benefited over 200 houses. Acres of ag land could only get up to 4 points. It was considered a little less important, and these numbers were, developed and presented in public meetings and a lot of it in consultation with county staff. Routine floods controlled, up to 5 points. Sediment yield reduced, not as important. Critical route protected was considered a very important factor. Could get either 0 or 9 points, et cetera. And then number of permits required would reduce the score. So next slide. The result of this, we had the 3 tiers. At the very bottom of this slide, you see the priority classification. So tier 3 were all the projects that had a total stage 1 score of -2 to 9 points. And then tier 1, which are the highest priority projects, had 14 plus points. You can see the 3 tiers and all the projects lined up within each one of them. Within each tier, each project was sorted by benefit cost ratio. So a lot of the tier 1, the highest projects also had high benefit cost ratios, but you can see tier 2 also had a project that had a pretty high benefit cost ratio. So, you could just see it broken out in the different ways here. After, if the tier 1, if a project was in the same tier as another and had the same benefit cost ratio, then they were sorted by cost, with the lowest cost projects being the highest. And over there in tier 3, you can see that we've highlighted several rows. All of those are crossing improvements associated with the Mesa Drain. So because of the way that the benefit cost ratio was done, only accounting for houses and agricultural land impacted by flooding, they did not have any benefits, quantified in using those means. But they might have, they obviously have benefits for the irrigation district as far as maintenance and water supply, which were not considered. Plus, all those projects would probably need to be done together in order to fully realize their benefits. So you can consider them, all the yellow highlightings as potentially being a package deal. Every project has its own little quirks and differences, but that's an important one to keep in mind. So the next slide.
So just on those yellow ones, one of the reasons those didn't show any impact on houses is we did not model the drain itself, right? So, and these are basically increasing the capacity of the drain so that the water stays within the drain. So clearly there's impacts. It's just we didn't get to quantify them for this particular project. So a potential FME to deal with these is to basically put together a model of the Mesa Drain.
Yes, and that's important to consider when we decide, how we're going to prioritize these projects, which we'll get to at the end and do the same method that we just did before. So the results of that prioritization, all of the tier 1 projects are shown in red. The tier 2 are this green, and the tier 1 is just the tiny little dots. And another factor that was taken into consideration when we developed those cutoffs was, do these projects, represent the county, evenly, or do they favor any given geographical location? And this shows that the method we used, they were kind of spread out in different areas, which was good. It's what we wanted. Showing little bias, or as little as possible. So the questions here, and we're going to open up to a poll in a minute, but let me just explain these questions. Question 1, can we make a decision with qualitative factors used in the county stormwater master plan? And so those qualitative factors, again, are that 2-stage prioritization, and we're not asking, whether we accept the values or the cutoffs that were used. It's just, do we want to use that same process? Do we want to make edits to it, or no? Do we want to define something new? So before we go in there, Gisela, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes, if we can hear from the county to see what their experience was, and if there's any lessons learned or any criteria that they think would have been good to modify. I think that would be very helpful before we enter into any of the questions of the poll.
Isela, I guess that one's directed to me, so I'll just go ahead and say that. I think we feel still fairly comfortable with what we had established, I guess, at that time. But just like I'm assuming that we're gonna vote later on in a similar fashion, where there has been some additional, some areas that we did experience some flooding recently, in these recent floods that I think we would like to be able to have that opportunity to consider some of these new sections. And then also I wanted to touch on the discussion about those crossings on the Mesa Spur drain. I'm gonna assume, and I'm not sure, maybe Omar can answer this, or AECOM, but I'm gonna assume that they're probably proposing a project that would basically do the same thing, and if so, that project would, as mentioned, could be analyzed as one that would show as much more beneficial. So I don't know if that's something that you guys can confirm.
And I'll chip in on that. Yes, we are looking at ways to bring up the priority items on anything relating to the Mesa drain and Mesa Spur drain. If we can bring them up in terms of prioritization, I guess through your process, it didn't come up as overly important, but for us, and as development continues along the lower valley, for us, this is the most important project that we have going on.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that'll, should be a more competitive project when it's considered as a whole project, as mentioned. So I don't know if that answers your question, Isela.
So perhaps we would
yeah.
like adding a new qualitative factor for benefits to the stakeholder, or something to that effect.
Or we can add that project in to the, later on, Chris is going to talk about the projects that let me see.
Yeah, we have some slides later that talk about other projects not included in the city or county stormwater master plans. And that was one of them that we spoke with Omar and Dr. Blair about at EPC WID number 1. So we are aware that's a high priority. And we discussed that in order to size several of those crossings, we would need a detailed model, hydraulic model of the lower Mesa drain. So we're leaning in the direction of creating an FME, a study to develop that hydraulic model first. And once that's developed, then we can go ahead and size those crossings. So it's likely yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we're going to, if we have time, we're going to get into how to deal with all the other projects around the region other than the city and the county. And this one, which is on the list we have from the irrigation district, this one would likely go into a separate pot and would be addressed separately from the county master plan. It would be a project that it would be a general, it would be basically with dual sponsors, the county and the irrigation district.
No, okay, so even if we move forward with the same qualitative factors, that project will not, rise as part of the county stormwater master plan, but it still will get the attention.
Right, it gets in because it'll be submitted by the irrigation district. All right. So can we proceed with the polls here? Brian?
Sure thing. So the first question is regarding the qualitative factors from the county stormwater master plan. So all the responses have been yes to that.
Okay.
If no other responses, I'll close that, and then we'll go to the next question, which is about the point values, or yeah.
Yeah, so go ahead and flip up to that slide that had all those point values. You can see just because of the numbers, some of these were favored higher than others, or more heavily weighted than others. Do we want to accept the existing point values from the county stormwater master plan or reassign them. And hopefully you can vote even though that window is kind of in your way.
You can drag it over to your other screen if you have two screens.
You can't drag it over.
Ah, okay.
Okay, but it looks like the same responses for that. So all yes there. And then lastly, for identifying the county projects as potentially feasible, we can use the scoring totals, select a cutoff point. We can also do that plus add additional county projects for those other flooding, other areas where flood risk has been identified since the stormwater master plan, or we can go through the list one by one. So I see some feedback's already coming in, but here's the official.
Yep, and again, we don't need to decide what those cutoffs would be now. And we have two different types of numbers, the qualitative and the BCR. So we would come up with two different cutoffs, but we do that at a later point. The question here is, do we want to use that and then accept whatever it comes up with? The second answer, do we want to do that? But, if we find exceptions, of individual cases, we can have another stage here where we decide on those exceptions as well. Or number three, like you said.
Well, the second point is to Gilbert's note that there were things they identified in this recent flood that they may want to do that's not in the plan. And so you could add another project to the county plan before you rank them.
Right. So looks like the same replies there. So I think we're good there.
Okay. So Chris, I want you to just run through this really quickly. These added.
Okay. So you want to start with the first one?
Yeah, what we're going to do now is we're going to go through a list of projects from different entities that we've identified. Going back to the first slide up here, right? We have projects from TxDOT and the Corps and IBWC and EP and the Irrigation District, and we know we have Joanna on the line. There'll be projects in from Hudspeth eventually. We're just going to go through the ones that we already have in our list, and we're not going to go over them in any great detail. We just want to show you we have information from them. And Joanna, did you submit projects that you were interested in as part of your surveyor stakeholder survey?
I believe I did, just one that we're currently looking at. And then I'm in conversations with Omar to help kind of get us better organized.
Yeah,
okay,
so we expect in collaboration with Hudspeth County, that irrigation district, there's going to be more that are going to be submitted even after the survey. Question is, do we still use a survey mechanism to submit them, or we email them directly to you?
Chris, how do you, and Brian, how do you
email directly?
Okay.
I'd say email them directly to me, and we can make sure they'll be considered.
Got it.
So Chris, I want to get to the voting at the end of this. So all I really want you to do is list these as we go through.
Okay. So there are a couple arroyos from that EPC WID #1 brought to our attention, new arroyos that have caused issues, the Moncado and the arroyo at Tornillo, we're calling it. They don't have official names. We've already discussed the lower Mesa drain and how that could be a potential FME, which once the FME is done can lead to FMPs. There's a river drain at San Elisario, or the river drain at San Elisario that Omar brought up, and he put us in contact with San Elisario. They're coordinating with the University of Auburn on Auburn, trying to create a butterfly sanctuary. And we also have the Riverside Regulating Reservoir, a water supply project that may or may not have flood benefits, but it was included in the state water plan. Next slide. USIBWC projects. We know that Dr. Bora brought up two arroyos, two creeks that enter the Rio Grande, where there are sediment issues at the mouth of those creeks. And I spoke with Hector Delgado yesterday in detail about some of those issues. It was very helpful. He's in the Presidio district. And we also have this list of levee projects. We are currently waiting for an updated list. We know that this isn't the most current, but Delbert is working on providing the most recent status on some of these levee projects. So this is just a list from several maps that are available on the USIBWC website. Next slide. We have spoken with USACE about some of their projects. We're waiting to get some more information, but we know that they have they've studied a project in Cibolo Creek in Presidio, which my understanding is that the county of Presidio has maintenance responsibilities for some levees on a tributary or a creek that flows to the Rio Grande. And if those levees were to fail, then there would be some significant risks in Presidio from that creek. We also have Rio Bosque in El Paso was another one that was identified that might be a potential green project. Keystone Dam seepage project, which the Corps has already coordinated with EP Water on, and the Sabata system, which just kicked off in El Paso. So there aren't any alternatives for that yet, but that's a study that we've provided some of our models to the Corps so that they can study further. TxDOT, we are waiting on a list of projects from them. There wasn't an immediate list that they had to provide, but these are projects that AECOM has worked on with TxDOT. So this list will likely increase, but we know that there were several crossings analyzed on Mesa Street. There were on US 190 two bridges that were identified as having scour issues that need to be addressed at what's called the Draw and the Richburg Draw are the two bridges. SM 170, there's a feasibility study we did from Candelaria to US 67 in Presidio County, and also from Presidio to Study Butte, which is an ongoing study. So that one doesn't actually have projects identified yet. Next slide. From stakeholder survey coordination, we've had some conversations where we have identified that there is a Comanche Creek Reservoir in Pecos County, a dam that has been overtopped or failed in the past, causing flooding in I believe it was Fort Stockton. There's also a stream flow harvesting and reforestation project on Alameda Creek that Jeff Bennett brought to our attention. And there's also an EP water supply project where they're considering a chain of aquifer recharge basins in El Paso that Eric Banks at EP Water has mentioned. Next slide.
Okay, so it's back to me. So again, going back to our original flow chart, we were going to try today to come up with the process for how to winnow down the city master plan, how to winnow down the county master plan, and how to winnow down all the other ones, right? So we have to provide this process to the Water Development Board by early December, and it has to be voted on by the regional flood planning group before then. So this is just a proposal to put together what we've learned by reviewing the city and the county master plan and see if we can come up with agreement on a generalized process for dealing with all the other ones. The ones that are in there from the IBWC, lumped in with the ones from Hudspeth County, lumped in with the ones from the irrigation district. How do we address those? So this set of rules is just a proposed set of rules that we can discuss. If a project is part of a prioritized list of projects, in other words, if there's been a public process like we had in in the city and with the county, we would follow the same process as you resolved above for the city of and county of El Paso. We'd address all the projects in the list together. We would basically keep that ranking system because that's what you decided for those two systems, and then choose an option to select which projects will undergo further evaluation. That would be where we, as you decided for the city and county, you would rank them, add projects if you needed to, and choose a cutoff. If the project is not part of a prioritized list, then you create a list of all such regional projects. So you'd lump together what the city of Pecos wants with Hudspeth County, with city of Presidio, with IBWC, and you'd use factors and scoring per method to be developed by the subcommittee, which we'll deal with next weekend, next meeting. But we'll be able to have a general process described, and then we'll choose an option for selecting which projects will undergo further evaluation. Does anybody have any improvements to the wording of this? This pretty much follows what we've discussed earlier in the meeting.
So my question is, the first section says if project is part of a prioritized list of projects, but if it's already part of it, then it's not another project to look at. So I guess every project we would add after this point would fall under that projects that are not part of a prioritized list. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, I didn't explain this properly, but this is what we would do if, for instance, there were some entity elsewhere within the region that hasn't responded yet. We've had some indication in the surveys that there are plans out there for other counties, but we've not been able to actually find a county stormwater master plan other than the one for the city of El Paso, but we haven't precluded that they may exist. So let's say a county out there actually has gone through a public process and ranked the projects. We would do it the same way we did it, we just discussed for the city and county. We'd basically keep their ranking system, but we would allow them, before we cut down their list, we'd allow them to add other projects and score them if they wanted to. That's basically what that first section says. The second section says, all right, there's a list, but they haven't gone through a process to prioritize them. We're going to throw them all together. We're going to create the scoring process for them, and we're going to sort them and separate them per systems that are to be defined by the committee. So basically, it's if they have a process they've already gone through, we'll keep it. If they don't have a process, we'll create your own process. That's what this says, right? Right. But again, this is kind of generalized, but we think it'll meet the requirement for the Water Development Board to describe our process, right? So keep this under my 15 minutes over. I'd like to propose that we think about voting on the process we've just developed for how to handle the City of El Paso Stormwater Master Plan projects, vote on the same thing for the El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan, and then vote on that slide I just discussed. And this is where we need the proposal to vote from somebody.
So moved.
Second.
I don't know who's seconding. I think Omar proposed.
Omar, did you make the motion?
Yes.
I seconded.
Yeah.
Jeff, okay, thank you.
All right, so now let's do the votes on these things. Brian, do you have them prepared at this point?
Yeah. So the first vote will be.
And this one will not be an anonymous vote. All the other ones have been anonymous votes, right?
Oh, okay. Let me change that. I have to. All right. All
You're
right,
going to have to.
First.
Yeah.
This first one is pertaining to the city of El Paso, and so I had to pack a lot of information into a single line. So the first part is using the existing stormwater management plan factors and scoring values with the modification to account for those construction impacts by lowering that one permit factor, and then identifying projects by selecting the cutoff point for scoring totals and adding other projects as needed with discussion.
Now, this is one that only the committee members should vote on. So Delbert, this is one you don't vote on.
You read my mind. I was having an internal struggle there. Thank you.
Are there any opposing?
All right.
Okay. So Dave, I don't see any opposing votes in the poll. Do we need to formalize that vote before we move to the next one?
No, I think it's passed, right?
Okay. Closing that. Then the next one is similar, related to the El Paso County project. Should we use those as master plan factors from the county and scoring values as is, and identify projects by selecting a cutoff point? Same thing. Okay. Any objections to that? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the next poll, which is pertaining to the other projects. So this one is worded a little differently. Again, there's a lot packed in here, but for identifying other projects, should the RFPG first use the existing prioritization lists where available, following similar processes as a city and county, where we keep the existing ranking systems and apply a scoring cutoff with manual addition of projects. And then secondly, if there are no existing prioritization lists, develop new factors and scoring methods that will be discussed in our next subcommittee meeting for identifying those projects.
Do we have more questions? Because I really need to leave.
This is it. This is the last one. So, okay, I think we're good there. Closing that poll. So I believe we're done with the voting.
Okay, thank you. We'll see you at the next meeting.
Okay, so who does the tentative future meeting dates for subcommittees? Is that you, Chris?
I think typically we hand it back to Gisela on that one. I'm sorry, to Annette on that one. We don't have any more slides.
Let me ask a question before we go to that. How many, if any, of the 96 city projects or the 69 county projects are already funded?
I think you have to defer to the city and county on that one.
From the county.
Are any of those projects funded, or are they all currently unfunded?
There's two that are on the list that are already funded for the county.
Okay. And for the city?
My CIP and see which ones are in the CIP and waiting for funds. They're already planned. There's some that are coming up next year, and those ones would be funded next year, but they're already planned for.
Okay, if there are some that are funded already or going to be funded, we know that they're going to be funded. I'm just thought, do those need to be removed from consideration by this process?
Not on my end. Maybe the ones for next fiscal year, yes, but the ones after that, we would need to keep them.
How about the county?
Yes, I think we would have to remove those since they're already funded.
Okay, and if you guys could interact with the contractor to make sure that happens, I'd appreciate it.
Sure thing.
So for the future meeting dates, I'm assuming that have to happen prior to November the 15th, so we can get whatever we want on the agenda. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, I think we have it scheduled for Monday, November 15th, actually, according to our doodle poll.
Yes.
And so it's from it'll be from 3 to 5 p.m. Mountain Time. And just to clarify, Brian, that gives us enough time, as long as we post it that night, we'll meet the requirements for the November 30th 2-week, because it requires 14 days. So yeah, if we post it that night or before the meeting time of November 30th, which is going to be, I guess, 9 a.m. Mountain Time. So if we post it before 9 a.m. Mountain Time on Tuesday the 16th, then we'll still meet our requirements. So yeah, that's what we're planning on right now. The next meeting for Subcommittee 2, the final one before we post the process, will be November 15th at 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Mountain Time.
So just to keep we've done a lot of the hard work on this meeting. We've already got all the details we need for the write-up for the process for the state, except for coming up with the scoring system for the other projects. So what you might think about is whether you can think about starting with the process that the city has, which is relatively easy to apply because it doesn't involve doing cost-benefit analysis at this stage, right? Which the county one did, and see if you can think of variations on the way the city did it, which you think is appropriate for the full region, and we could start with that at the beginning of our discussion in the next meeting. So ideally for this posting to the state, we would have this scoring method at least worked out in more detail than just a generalization that we're going to do this at the next meeting. So that's the work for the next meeting.
All right, thank you. Any objections, or I think we've already taken a doodle poll for this next meeting. So unless anybody has any last comments, I think that's all we have today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I could get a motion during the meeting.
So moved, Omar.
Second. Let's
All
go.
in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Have a good day.
See you in a little bit.
Ryan, you're recording, right? You gonna stop? Or no?